The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, it's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast of the U.S., so let's get started. Thank you for participating in the Way Forward for Smart Grid webinar. This is the first in a series of 3 such events that are aimed at providing a clear picture of the status and future of smart grid. My name is Nick Manley and I'm with Clasma Events, your host for today's webinar. Our objective today for today's event is to provide you with a smart grid industry overview and the perspectives of people heavily involved in the smart grid overall effort. We'll then take a look forward at what the future holds for the smart grid and smart energy. That will be followed by a Q&A session, so be sure to tweet your questions and comments using the GridWeek hashtag. You can log on to gridweek.com and post your questions there using the post comment feature, or you can post your questions using the questions function of your webinar control panel. Your moderator for today's event is Anto Budiarjo, President and CEO of Clasma Events. So without further ado, Anto.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everybody. This webinar is coming to you live from the offices of EEI here in Washington, D.C., where we have a great panel to have this discussion about this very important subject. So if we can get the next slide, please, Nick. So this webinar is born out of a lot of discussion that's happened over the past few months within the organizing activities of GridWeek 2011. We have been working with the advisory board and the organizing committee since December to put together the event. And since 2007, which is the first year that we organize GridWeek, GridWeek has always been organized in a very to bring together the broadest range of stakeholders involved with smart grid, and it's always been core to the mission of GridWeek to bring all of these players together to understand how we can sort of make sure that smart grid is successful, that we can move forward the agenda of smart grid. And a core sort of MO of the planning process and the organizing process is collaboration. We collaborate a great deal with all types of stakeholders, from utilities to government entities to technology groups to vendors and many other organizations that are very actively involved in smart grid one way or another. And so with regards to this specific webinar, again, as I said, it was born out of the discussions, and the discussions that typically happen in organizing GridWeek have been or continue to be very, very interesting discussions in their own rights. We meet at least once a month with the advisory board, and as part of this, we kind of thought that it would be a good idea to share some of this thinking, some of the conversations that we have in the organizing committee with a broader audience. So the specific objectives of the webinar is to share this thinking, solicit input from the broader smart grid community, and also to make sure that we include your input in the process, in the planning process of GridWeek. So again, as Nick mentioned, we are soliciting input from you either through Twitter or through the blogging mechanism on the gridweek.com website, or through the tool that we have on the GoToMeeting webinar. So I want to introduce the first speaker, as it were, is Chris Hickman. I think many of you involved in smart grid and energy has somehow had some interaction with Chris. He has a very great perspective on what's going on. So I want to hand it over to Chris and give you a perspective of what's going on in the industry right now. Chris.
Thanks, Anto, and good morning, everyone. Just briefly, because again, as Anto pointed out, the primary reason for the webinar is to provide you some information about what we're doing currently in our thought process, but most importantly is to extend the collaboration efforts so we can help adjust the agenda and be able to do the things on a go-forward basis and extends this collaboration and collects the best available information from the knowledge set that exists in our industry. There's a tremendous amount going on in our industry today, and smart grid has never moved forward faster than it has now. Recently at Connectivity Week, we were able to hear from a host of communities that typically we don't hear a lot from, people like venture capitalists and private equity groups. And while the ARA funding of a little over $4 billion was very interesting for our industry, it was also very interesting to hear from that community that they've invested over $10 billion just in the last 2 years into smart grid companies. And not only that, they've raised money on the order of another 10 to 30 billion in terms of funds across the board for clean tech around the world. So there's a tremendous amount of new influence in our overall industry from outside participants. Smart grid is moving forward very, very rapidly, and it's no longer kind of a U.S. Thought process. There's a dramatic amount of activity happening around the world, and all of this leads back to one critical point. The collaboration is key. The great efforts from George Arnold at NIST for the collaboration of the S-chip standards and moving forward with those efforts, reaching out internationally, as you probably recently heard, this collaborative forum is now reaching out and moving into Asia. We're going to have a Grid Week Asia event in India in January, and it's all of these things creating this venue for collaboration, because we're all starting to figure out very, very clearly that there has to be a distinct value proposition to be delivered. This value proposition isn't something that can kind of be waved and then a lot of hand-waving activity. It's something that people want to know for all the money that's being invested in the things that are being done. What is the real outcome here? Not a piecemeal saying, hey, it's great that I have something on the side of my house. You said it was going to be cool, but I'm not going to get to see the data for 3 years. These kinds of things are not resonating with the interaction with all of the different stakeholders in and around the value chain of electricity. These common themes and common stories are all coming back to one core principle, that we must collaborate for our success as an overall industry to be able to serve all the different stakeholders in this industry. And as such, we've been having just a tremendous amount of fun for me personally in this industry with the just dramatic and rapid change that is going on. But all of that change is obviously uncomfortable because it changes the way that we have to think about the business, the industry, and these events and events like them are allowing us an opportunity to have the conversations to be able to move our industry forward across the board. And with that, we're going to save as much time as we can for the Q&A. Anto?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris. So in putting together Grid Week, we thought a lot about the theme for the event and what is the focus that we need to bring. The theme that we came up with the whole for the whole event is the way forward, and this is also the theme of this particular webinar. And each day of the event is actually focused on different aspects of that. And the first the first main day of the conference, we really want to be looking forward. And the rationale behind that is we really want to understand what energy consumption or the energy business and the energy system is likely to look in some time horizon, sort of 10, 20 years, something like that in the future. So the three speakers that we have that will speak next are those that are very involved in putting together material and just the thinking about this, the whole concept of looking forward. So I want to introduce Paul Molitor from NEMA, who is very active in this whole process and obviously very active in the smart grid community. So Paul, over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Anto. As far as what we're looking at, as any good grid operator knows, an optimal state is only as good as long as nothing changes. So if you take a look at what's going to influence the directions that we go, what I really was interested in and kind of curious about is the business drivers and the business climate that's going to impact everything that we do over the next handful of years. So you kind of take a look at this global economy and the grid as that topic area. And it's really a question of what are the future consequences of what's going on today. So if we take a look at the competition for the rare earth materials are going to have an impact on our ability to build renewable systems. You take a look at what's happened in Japan. You take a look at where capital is going. There are a number of things out there that are going to push us around in various directions as far as the grid goes. And so, in terms of affecting our business, that's what I'm really thinking about and really trying to focus on here. And it falls into that whole idea of the competition for capital and resources, the energy business and the environment. How does that come into play? If you take a look at the recent activities in the Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States, that's going to have an impact certainly on the people who operate the coal-fired generation plants. And so that's going to be another thing that moves the dial. And then the whole idea of energy policy. This isn't going to be a rehash of where we are and what's going on with policy today, but really much more discussion in terms of what's needed for energy policy going forward. One of the things that Chris mentioned earlier was the whole idea of all of the money that's been spent, and certainly the stimulus bill is one of those things that's really driven some of our directions here recently. So what is the energy grid and the business of doing business around the grid look like in the post-stimulus world? So we want to take a look at this as the implications for all of the stakeholders, whether they're vendors, IT companies, grid operators, or even the international folks that we'd be dealing with. And then, the whole idea of this is to keep an eye on what are those future barriers that we're going to be running into, and then how do we navigate that? How do we develop the systems and the regulation, and how do we move the capital and the resources around so that we can get through those barriers? So again, this the whole idea is it's a focus on the business of doing business here, and we're really looking forward to some very interesting panelists and some very detailed discussion about what it is that we think the industry needs going forward.
Thank you, Paul. I think the big picture here is obviously important, and that's that thread of thinking that has stirred up a lot of discussion within the advisory board and the organizing committee at large. So really looking forward to that discussion. So next we have Chris Eisenberg from the Edison Electric Institute from EEI, and Chris is going to talk about again looking forward from a looking forward theme. What is the utility industry or the electric industry going to look like in the future in the next few years? So hand it over to you, Chris.
Great, thanks, Anto. I just want to take 1 second just give you a background on EEI. We're the trade association for the U.S. Investor-owned utilities. We're also recipients of about 70% of the investment grants that Chris Hickman mentioned earlier in his talk. Here at EEI, representing the IOUs, we think every day about the challenges and the opportunities and how our companies are going to migrate through this transformational era that we're in. And I thought that, that's why we're involved in Grid Week, because I think that we network, we get new ideas, we get to share those ideas, other ideas with the community and the collaborative spirit that we're dealing with through our involvement in such an event. So the way I kind of approach these questions and the idea of the utility business innovation beyond beyond kilowatt, beyond selling product, is if Thomas Edison walked on the earth today and he looked at the grid, we're always told that he would see something that looks fairly similar on the outskirts of what the grid looked like or when he was developing it or as it was being developed. But I would say if you pull the curtain back, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of technology that's being thrown on the grid that he certainly would be scratching his head about, even from his point of view as one of the greatest inventors to ever walk the earth. So basically, we're going to approach the, how are utilities innovating kind of in 3 different areas. The one is again, along with the spirit of Grid Week, is partnering and innovating through partnerships, through developing new ideas, new technologies, and new partnerships that the IOUs are pursuing right now. The areas that we're doing these partnerships are in the areas of demand response, integrating renewables, distributed generation, electric vehicles, and actually the whole touchstone with the customer energy use, using energy and control of electricity. So secondly, we're also thinking every day about how this traditional utility-customer relationship, which is essentially the same over the last 70 to 80 to 100 years, and that relationship is based on getting a bill at the end of the month and basically waiting for our customers to call us and for us to respond to any issues that they're having and provide service. How is that going to change in this new disruptive and transformational era? So we're going to be looking at that as well. And then finally, to be able to partner with other organizations and to be able to enhance that customer-utility relationship, utilities are going to have to look internally and figure out ways that we as an industry can organize ourselves. What are the different regulatory needs that we would need? What are the energy policies that are going to have to exist? Business processes. What's the investment going to look like? Are we going to be moving from central station generation, which I would argue is already happening, to a more distributed model? Also, the workforce. What is the utility workforce going to look like? Back to the customer-utility relationship, I would say that right now that whole relationship is based on the call center, and I would say that right now utilities that we represent are re-looking at that model and how that model works. We're also looking at what kind of partners we're going to be dealing with. We had talked about as an organizing committee, how will utilities be partnering with an organization such as the Geek Squad and be able to serve serve our customers in the home. Traditionally, utilities have not been in the home, but we certainly know that that's where we need to be. We certainly know that there are a lot of other actors in the industry who want to be in there as well. So basically, through Grid Week, we're going to be trying to capture a lot of intelligence and and we're going to be able to share some lessons learned and look forward on both utility business innovation, on that relationship that I spoke about, and also what the challenges are that utilities are facing now and will be facing down the road to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And next, I want to ask Deanna Traust to make some comments. And we've heard about the big picture, the global picture, which is obviously very important. Clearly the changes that's going to happen in the utility space, the utility industry and the utility business is very important. We really can't look forward into the future without taking note or discussing what society is actually going to be in the future. Society is going through tremendous change now with the information technology and the digital world that we now live in, and we're having this discussion to try and figure out how that's going to impact the electricity consumption. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Deanna to make some comments on that. Just remind you, everybody, if you have any questions, please post them on the GoToMeeting control panel, or tweet them with the GridWeek hashtag, or post your comments on the gridweek.com website. So Deanna, hand it over to you.
Great, and we do look forward to your questions. Thanks a lot, Anto. So at the Galvin Electricity Initiative, which I represent, we think a lot about system transformation as driven by new policies and new market participants. So that's the principle that we'd really like to carry through at Grid Week this year through the Energy Empowered Society track. So we're going to be taking a good look at how individuals, homes, and businesses, how communities even will interact with the power system in the future. Of course, some things about this future we can envision as technological entrepreneurs dream up new ways that people can interact with the power system, can use and consume power, even participate as active market participants in the future today. But some of these things we can't. So we look forward to having a number of speakers that can kind of help paint a picture of that future and really think outside the box. But a key principle that I think is important for people to remember that we're going to be playing throughout is the fact that there will be new market participants in the future. People that entities that today are either passive participants or don't participate at all. So we're going to be looking at that on 3 different levels. First, on the individual level through the personal grid. Now, what does that mean? People may have heard the term nanogrid. Certainly they've heard microgrids, but maybe think beyond that and think about the nanogrid. We've got Bloom Energy and others marketing products that they call a personal grid. What will that look like in the future? Will you be able to control your whole energy system via handheld, or will that all be automatic? But one thing's for sure is that consumers will be more engaged and hopefully will be greater participants in the future. Next, under empowered homes and businesses. We've all seen the trade show displays with the smart homes and a lot of technologies sort of waiting at the ready to be instituted at the home level and at the business level in the commercial space. Is that the reality of the future, what we've all seen at those trade shows, or is it something different? Will houses talk to each other in the future and be networked together? We think there's a huge opportunity with regard to tenants being more active participants in the electricity system of the future. Imagine, tenants actively taking a role in using energy and conserving energy with their buildings, and imagine even new revenue streams cropping up for small businesses as they interact with their building and even are able to make money through the enterprise. And then last, we're going to be looking at the community level. This is sort of emerging today. We see local mayors and even local governments interested in playing a more active role in the electricity system in the enterprise. They want to be involved in grid improvements. They want to have something to say in how the system is managed in some cases, and they can see an opportunity to represent their residents in maybe even purchasing cleaner power or power that's cheaper. So what's their role in the future? Will we all have our power procured by our local government, much the same way that they do with water and with sewer services today? What will be the benefits if that is the way of the future? And will, for example, will community-based microgrids become more of the norm? Will we all have a power system backup generation supply in our personal community? Will that happen among, maybe in our development? Maybe our condo association has a role there. So these are the kind of ideas and concepts that we're looking forward to playing out at Grid Week. And you can imagine this offers the opportunity for a lot of really engaged and dynamic speakers, and really some different kinds of speakers, to participate and share their ideas in this track.
Okay, thank you, Deanna. Again, if you have any questions, please fire them up. I'm seeing a few questions come in, but let's let me ask the first question. So I think we all know that pretty much everybody involved with smart grid are very busy right now. There's a lot going on in terms of actual deployment, in terms of conducting business, transacting business, and a whole bunch of things. With all this going on, why should we be caring about how things look forward in X number of years down the road? And why should we be exerting this amount of effort to do that? Maybe Chris Eisenbrich can start the discussion there.
Yeah, I think if you look at just from a utility point of view, you look at the planning horizons that we dealt with in the past, integrated resource plans, trying to meet load with, accurately within a 3 to 4 year, 5 year space. But I would argue that change is happening so rapidly that we can we have to start thinking about what we can't think about. Well, what might be out there that we need to be aware of. I mean, I think utilities are starting. I think there was a trend where strategic planning was kind of that function was reduced at utilities, and we're seeing it being brought in even more in use today, because the what if scenarios that are out there are much more prevalent, I think, than probably in the past. I mean, I think we as utilities, had a good sense of all the moving pieces and all the parts of the equation to be able to get to the answer. But as we look at the era that we're moving into now, there's such unknown that we really need to kind of broaden our minds almost from and this is from an industry that probably has the reputation that we're old, stodgy, and regulated, obviously. So so I think that's from our perspective. We're seeing that we really need to look a lot further ahead than we have in the past.
Can I summarize that in saying that unless you know where you're going, you can't be sure that we're doing the right thing? Kind of.
That's a good summation of that.
Okay. So Paul Molitor, from a vendor's perspective, why should we really care about the future?
Well, and tying this directly into the answer that Chris just gave, there have to be products that support those future features that he's talking about, and that doesn't happen overnight. There's a research and development cycle. There's you have to get it into a manufacturing line. There's a lot of steps that need to happen in order for those products to be in place and be effective. And in addition to that, there's the whole safety and security problem on top of that, especially when you're dealing with the National Electric Code. You've got to have those products tested. You've got to have them proven. And, we don't get a chance to slide something into the grid and determine, and find out through operations whether or not it's going to work. It has to work from the day that it goes out there. So the lead time in terms of getting the manufactured products together in order to support this future, we may be driving that even longer than what the utility companies are. It's our ability as manufacturers to respond that's going to impact that.
So Chris Hickman, maybe you can comment on this. You've been around the industry on many sides of the industry, and why is it really critical at this point to take a step back and understand the long-term strategic directions?
Well, I think what's really interesting to me is that people are really starting to understand that while the changes that happen in consumer electronics and the things that may happen in a building or in a home are pretty revolutionary, everybody's really starting to come around to the realization of what both Chris and Paul just described, that what's going to happen on the grid is not going to be a revolution but an evolution. The changes that we're going to see come to bear over the course of the next 5, 10, and 20 years will be very evolutionary for the grid itself, because we have trillions of dollars of infrastructure out there, and you're not going to displace that overnight. If we made the decision as a country right now to replace every meter, we're 7 to 10 years out if we consume the full production of the world for meters. This is not going to happen overnight, and and people aren't going to make that decision to move holistically right now. We're not going to change out transformers just because all of a sudden there's a $100 transformer on the marketplace that's smart. We've got something like 200 million of these things out there on the ground. That's not going to happen overnight, and I think because of that, having this very diligent thought process about what the evolution of the grid is going to look like while we're dealing with really all the revolutionary interfaces that we're going to need into the home or behind the meter to deal with the dramatic technological evolution that's happening on the consumer electric side really is becoming a major focal point, and because of that allows us to really need to look at this planning horizon and understand where we're headed to make sure that we're doing the right things to deal with it.
So, Chris, you mentioned evolution versus revolution. We're obviously in the middle of the digital world that we're being transformed into a digital world, which in many ways is a revolution in terms of how we think. So there's always this sort of conflict between evolution and things that happen in a sort of fast manner, such as a revolution. So maybe I want to throw it to Deanna Troust to sort of comment on this. And is this going to happen suddenly, or is it really an evolution that will take a long time? And how do we make the necessary steps along the way?
Well, you've actually chosen a term that's sort of a favorite of ours, the revolution idea. I mean, we at the Galvin Initiative think that entrepreneurial innovators are really a pivotal force and key actors in this transformation. And I feel, whether it's short-term or long-term, we feel that there needs to be a forum to explore those ideas and those visions that they may be kind of cooking up at present. Okay. So, we feel that Grid Week can provide that forum where we can really think outside the box and dream a little bit. But that then there's sort of practical benchmarks along the way as well, sort of to get to your idea of what the timeline is. you know, there's sort of the vision, and then there's steps such as prototyping that vision and really check, you know, kind of testing it out and see if it's gonna stick. We like to share an idea where Bob Galvin gave Ronald Reagan a prototype of the cell phone, and before that point he had no idea what that was or what it really could look like, but of course immediately wanted one. And it's those kinds of steps along the way that help you not just dream the vision, but realize the vision and then test the vision. So, you know, I think the vision is on both a short and a long-term schedule, but you can really get to that, by prototyping, you can really get to that vision more quickly by throwing out some examples and testing it out.
So we have a question from Ramesh Kalamur. Current terminology grid sounds more relevant to utility and vendors than ratepayers and consumers. Energy issues and opportunity frame as costs, as that of cost less provides better comfort and cleaner source of energy. Currently, smart grid doesn't convey those. Why are they not directly involved in this field? I think he's talking about more involved in the consumer side of things. Why are we not focusing much more on the consumer issues?
For everybody?
Yes, this was an open question. Put it up there on the screen.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, we're actively, like many of our utilities, you know, conducting focus groups with our customers throughout the country. And one thing that is coming out of that process is, and this is pretty self-evident, is that customers, you know, we're talking about smart grid. Customers don't know what the grid is. They don't know how electricity is generated. They don't know what are the guts, the nuts, and the bolts behind all that when the electricity comes out of the socket. So there's a huge education ramp that we have to go through to be able to sell this idea of what we would like to call modernizing the grid rather than smart grid. I think if we approached modernizing the grid or the smart grid as just, we're doing an upgrade of your system, and you know that system, you get reliable electricity, but there's some necessary upgrades that need to be done. I think you can sell it a lot easier than, you know, talking about technology and talking about even benefits. I mean, let's not start with the technology and even the benefits. Let's just talk about what they do now and work from there. I'm not sure if that answered the question. But we certainly.
I think it's really the question and discussion here is: are we focused enough on the consumer issues? Really, I mean,
yeah. And that's something that we talk about frequently, even during the organizing committee meetings. Is the whole idea. We talk about this as an infrastructure investment or an infrastructure upgrade. And the problem that you have is you can't go to the consumer and say, dude, I totally automated your substation, right, because it has no value to them whatsoever. So yeah, it's really difficult to develop the terms and the terminology that consumers can really relate to in terms of what we're doing. I remember seeing a survey about a year ago where they said that, I can't remember, it's either 75 or 80% of the people that they asked had never even heard of smart grid. So, you know, it's kind of a marketing term. It doesn't really have that much value, but yeah, we need to get beyond that barrier and into the terms and the benefits that the consumers can understand so that we can really explain what we're doing. And one of the things that's supposed to come out right about now was the Department of Energy was going to release a grant for consumer education. And this would be the multiple award winners. It's supposed to be coming out right now, the RFP. And so there are going to be a lot of people who are entering with consumer messaging here coming up very quickly.
Yeah, on this point, it's a good one and one that we think about a lot. I sort of feel that the marketing challenge, we kind of embarked on the marketing challenge halfway. In our view, conversations with consumers up front sort of lead you down a path that points you toward talking to them in a way that they understand. So, what's the practical application of that? I mean, it's really sort of talking to consumers up front and designing, and it's not just a marketing or communications issue, it's actually in my view, a system design issue. So if you talk to folks, figure out what they need, design your systems accordingly, then the language and the vernacular kind of plays out naturally because you've already met their needs with the actual program, rather than trying to sell them on a program that already exists or that you've developed to meet other needs than their own, because of course it doesn't really work unless they do buy in. So we kind of look at the marketing challenge that way, whereby you really have to get consumers involved very early on. And to your point, to the questioner's point, the language that has evolved and that we've been using is too technical for consumers in many cases. So there's certainly some work to be done there. And in Grid Week, we're really trying to sprinkle the consumer point of view throughout the conference. Last year we were focused very solidly on that issue and really explored it very deeply last year, and this year we're sort of permeating the sessions throughout with the consumer view and trying to explore that language issue throughout the conference.
Yeah, the common question last year was, how does this session or how does this speaker benefit the consumer? And that's we still keep that in the back of our minds as we're going through the planning process for this year.
Right.
So there's another question regarding the sort of the international aspect and also the aspect of the large visions by United Nations and others in terms of adopting renewable energy to very, very high levels, especially with power consumption in India and China increasing at a rapid rate. So how, maybe this is to you, Paul, and maybe also to Chris Hickman, how can we really be looking at this, understand what the impact of all of this is and how Smart Grid can help with this?
Well, the thing of it is and the way the question is phrased here, they talk about goals of 80% renewable power by 2050. You really are talking about a transition here. Again, this goes back to Chris Hickman's comment about evolution versus revolution. As we move toward these increasingly integrated sources of renewable power, they are going to have to coexist and cooperate with the legacy systems that are out there. So the whole idea of Smart Grid is that by building this intelligence into the grid, that we're able to absorb these things and make progress toward those goals. Specifically to the question, the way that it was written, the thing that we can do, that we can best do here in the United States to help some of these other developing nations is, we can prove to be a very effective testing ground. We're going to build these things. The state of California is ahead of some others in terms of their renewable goals. But that's going to be a very good proving ground to see how these new systems work and integrate and how we actually accomplish that evolution as we move toward these goals of 30, 40, 50, or even 80% renewable power by 2050.
Chris Hickman?
Yeah, I think this is really fascinating. It actually ties to the last question. And this longer-term vision, if we hope to be able to integrate the volume of renewables that people talk about onto the grid, there are some simple truths. A lot of these resources are variable and intermittent, and we don't just want power when the wind blows. We don't just want power when the sun is shining. And so it takes some of everything. We're not going to be able to do just one thing. And when I say that, that includes a collaboration across the continuum of everybody in the energy value chain. The building owners, the residential consumers, everybody's going to have to play in this transaction in a brand new way, in a way that is very technologically sound, that allows their environment not to be damaged, but allows a building to give a little bit back or actually take a little bit more at particular times. And that transaction and the overall ability of our grid to do that is going to ramp up dramatically in the next 5 years at those interfaces between the grid and the buildings to help facilitate these. But it is largely going to be a transaction between existing grid owners and operators and end-use consumers to be able to have any hope of balancing these types of resources. Because quite honestly, material science has not gotten there. Large-scale storage is still incredibly expensive, and while we all hold out hope that somebody's going to make a breakthrough either in battery technologies or supercaps or whatever to give us better capability to add storage to our grid, today the real aspect of being able to balance the grid is going to be able to create dynamic transactions with consumers. And so that's got to be a major focus for us, to create that better language, that better conversation, and hear from consumers what they're saying. And I think we've sometimes not listened in a way that is negative, and sometimes in a way that's overly positive. You know, when you do a pilot and you get, you know, a 6% penetration, that means 94% of the people didn't care. And so a lot of this is going to drive us forward in a really great new way to create an overall system efficiency instead of just a site efficiency, and really start changing the way that our grid operates, but in a way that makes it better for everybody.
So that question was actually from Perry Mystery, so thank you for that. We have another question that is actually very interesting, and I think from Judith Schwartz. It's really about the fact that not all the players involved in smart grid, and even in the utilities, there are many different utilities. Not all the players are moving at the same speed, because there are many utilities and other players that are just starting, and there are those that have got a lot of experience. How can we sort of make sure that we address the different needs of these different players in different stages of the game? So,
if you want to get an interesting question, you call on Judith Schwartz to throw it out. So I appreciate that question, Judith. I think that just from looking at a Grid Week point of view, people choose what sessions they want to be in because they feel some kinship to maybe that industry that's sponsoring that session. So I think it's a good idea to look at how we can do that. I'm not here to answer the question, and maybe that's more of Anto's job. But yeah, I think that you get some fairly interesting, not only discussion, but some perspectives if you threw a topic out there or some type of question and did see, what are the perspectives from those various parts of the industry. And as Anto said, even within in our industry, you've got utilities, all shapes and sizes, regions that they serve. The weather is different in certain areas, peaks and non-peak times of the year, and what's the value proposition and what's driving those utilities. They're going to be all over the map, so it would be interesting to look at that.
That's before you take in the international dimension, which changes.
Well, that also ties to Deanna's comment earlier about the whole idea that there are milestones that are out there. It's a question. I can't believe the milestones would really change that much, but the rate at which utilities hit and consumers hit those milestones for the changes in the technology. And then as you look at those, are there some where you can dwell? Can you install like 1/4 of the solution and live on that for several years and then move forward after that? So that's a really good question. That's that'll be somewhat between our future session. Then also, if you take a look at I think day 3 is the idea of the state of deployment. That's another thing that actually this could weave through all 3 days of the program.
I think if you look just right now practically on the ground, what's going on in the smart grid space, if you look at the timelines that a NIST process or the SGIP process is on, and how does that link up with the manufacturing process or the utilities adoption process or the political process,
The
regulatory process, you're going to get that pace is going to be very different. And the key is for the community around the table here to to work through that and try to align those different speeds.
So there's another interesting question here about who's really going to drive this. The person asking the question suggesting that he has heard that the consumer is going to drive this. Is that really going to be the case, or is it the utility side or the vendors actually going to be driving this, or is it going to be everything? And how does that going to play out? Again, looking forward, who's going to drive it?
I'll just make this quick. I would just say, from our point of view, it's the consumer, it's the customer.
Yeah.
You look at any other industry. I mean, cell phones. I don't think that was. I think now the amount of cell phones that are being used, the internet. I think the consumer drove that, and I think that's going to happen with the smart grid. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, no, we couldn't agree more. And it really just comes back again to assessing consumer wants and needs, and it's not just needs, it's wants and expectations, and sort of designing products accordingly. So, and there are obviously benefits for utilities and others along the way, but The consumer is driver. I mean, to Chris's point, it happens in every other industry. You know, P&G doesn't go about producing a new product without assessing the potential customer and their needs. So to the extent that we can, you know, operate in that same fashion, we'll come up with a better product and service offering.
Yeah, and our manufacturers are scattered across the board. I mean, we've got everything from the smallest connector manufacturer up to the people that make the big turbines. And if you take a look at that NIST conceptual diagram, where you've got generation, transmission, distribution, and consumer, you know, there's going to be very few changes in terms of what happens with generation. A few more maybe in terms of the technologies that go into transmission, quite a few more that go into distribution. But if you take a look at where the bulk of the technology is going to land, it's going to be on that consumer cloud, and that's what's really going to drive most of the change.
That was from a question was from Dave Oberholzer. We have another question here. I think should get some interesting discussion here. The question is really how is the structure of the utility industry a hurdle to moving forward? If you could draw the ideal utility industry structure, what would that be? So maybe Chris Hickman, you can comment on that.
Sorry, had to get the mute button. I think a lot of the structure, well, in-depth question, right? So when you look at the structure of the United States and the overall, you know, 3,000 plus utilities and all the different regulatory and states and jurisdictions and all of these things, the structure of what we're looking towards creates complexities. But at the end of the day, Deanna, I think, has done a lot of great stuff with Galvin and what is now happening with the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative. And people are starting to celebrate our similarities instead of our differences. And because of that, we're starting to see solutions arrive in forms like SGIP that will work across a continuum of different types of structures. And so I think as we move forward, technology will actually help us solve a bunch of these problems. But, you know, the utility industry, the regulatory industry has, you know, taken a lot of abuse here in the last 10 years. But the bottom line is, you know, electricity is being provisioned to the United States, inflation adjusted at a cost less than what it was 20 to 30 years ago in most of the country. And in addition to that, the overall community of people have always shown a dramatic interest in making it better for everybody that's associated. And I think that that is not going to change moving forward. I think it's going to continue in that mode, and I think that the value propositions are going to be created and the structures that exist, while cumbersome here in the U.S., much more simple to deal with abroad, you know, with fewer players, are going to start helping us drive the right answers to these questions.
Well, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the other thing also, this kind of ties to the previous question about, you know, the explorers versus the more cautious utilities that are out there. And, you know, if you take a look at the first 5 words of this question, how is the structure of the utility industry? Well, that's more than 5 words, but whatever. If you take a look at the first handful of words in there, the structure of the utility industry, the whole idea that these utilities that could be in different stages of the technology deployment are going to have to work together, that's something that's going to, you know, we have to be very cautious as we proceed.
Just to add quickly to that, I would certainly say that and thanks for the shout out, Chris, I would certainly say that the utility industry structure of the future should incorporate some compensation for utilities for innovation, whereas now there isn't a lot of that. There's not a lot of incentive for utilities to innovate vastly because they're not compensated for that. So that seems to be a key component from our perspective.
So that was from Brian.
I think, Anto,
yeah.
Sorry, Anto, on Deanna's point, I do want to point out that these structures are being created. Regulators and utilities are becoming creative in this regard, and they're recognizing that figuring out ways to, while decoupling is a very intense and complex way to deal with it, there are simpler ways to deal with it in a way to provide incentives to everybody involved in the transaction. And I think as long as we as a group recognize that it really doesn't make a lot of sense to damage any one player in the energy chain, the value energy chain. We really do need to find business models and methods that create value for all the players. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable solution. And I think because of that, you're seeing some very creative regulators and utilities working closely together with industry and consumer organizations to create these mechanisms to allow that innovation to occur.
So another interesting question just come in. It's really about talk is cheap. I'll read the full question. Consumers are the silent majority who will not respond to what you talk, but what you can demonstrate. So the question is, how, I think in the context of the future, how can utilities demonstrate the value, the benefits of smart grid rather than just talking about it? What's the likely sort of scenario looking forward on that?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, this is Chris Eisner, it kind of reminds me of, when there was a lot of talk about what retail competition was going to bring. It's funny because the utilities got labeled as the ones that were pushing that. I can guarantee you we weren't the ones pushing retail competition, and I wouldn't say we're the ones pushing smart grid right now. There's a lot of players in this space, whether it's the administration, whether it's regulatory commissions, whether it's communities, as Deanna said, that are all involved in this. We're the implementers. We'll do what the consumers want. I think if you look back at how we got to where we are now, maybe the expectations were set a little high, and we're looking to try to manage those expectations a little bit better. I would say that right now, one thing that our organization is doing to try to make sure that we're working with consumers and regulators out of the gate, rather than getting to a rate case and then trying to explain ourselves or get rejected for a rate case, is we've started something called the Critical Consumer Issues Forum, where we're sitting down with NARUC and Masuka members and talking about the tough issues way ahead of time, rather than waiting for I'll mention just the BG&E case. We'll give you cost recovery when we see those benefits, and we'll get back to you. So we don't, that doesn't benefit anybody. That doesn't benefit the utilities. It doesn't benefit consumers. And it doesn't benefit the regulators. So I would say, we are demonstrating benefits in small ways. I would also say that, we've got the Smart Grid Investment Grants is a program that was designed to kind of push that and kickstart that. And right now, I know the DOE is looking at the metrics and looking at, what are the benefits, not just on the customer's bill or energy usage, whether it's saved, but also what are the societal benefits. How much gasoline is saved when you don't have to do those truck rolls. I mean, that adds up. So I think that the main key point here is that expectations were set very high, and I think that we're getting back down to reality now.
Well, and this was part of that conversation that we had during the all-hands meeting yesterday morning, where, you say we're going to make the grid smarter. Well, what does that mean? Well, okay, we'll call it grid modernization. Well, what does more modern mean? But then when you start getting into the whole idea of reliability, you can measure. Right. Sustainability, you can measure, like you said about the truck rolls. There are a number of metrics out there that you can measure that we'd be able to prove to consumers that they're actually getting some benefit out of this. I know a lot of people in the beginning said that smart grid is expected to save the consumers money. Gosh darn, I'm hoping just to break even on the electric bills. There's going to be such a huge investment. I hope it's, that it's a manageable increase in terms of the amount that they spend on electricity, but there are long-term benefits that we can measure.
Absolutely. Just one other point on that. You mentioned earlier that you can't sell somebody on automating their substation, but if you live in the DC metro area and that helps, improve your reliability, that customers can see. So I think that's demonstrable and
Let's jump in on one more. This is the one last point on this. I agree with you, Deanna. I live in the Washington area, so I understand what you're talking about. The one thing is, I think there's some disconnect that there are utility benefits to the smart grid. We're seeing them every day. Our members wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't the case. But making that connection to how those benefits flow to the consumer is something that we probably haven't done a very good job of.
So there's a I think it's more of a comment that's come in from David Katz. Quite interesting that while the consumer is the focal point and a lot of the discussions is about the economic price and the cost, many people, as it were, many human beings, let's put it that way, are actually not economically, they're not actually paying the bills, but they're actually using electricity. And, you know, the economic, you know, I came in here to use this room, and I'm not.
Yeah, the bill's in the mail.
But how do we make sure that the discussion about energy efficiency and the importance of all of this is not, or maybe it's a question, do we need to make it so that it's not just the economic value, but a much more broader thing? I don't even know how to, but that's a very interesting comment. I don't know, Chris Hickman, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd love. I think we should challenge ourselves here, and I think that as we have continued to watch the evolution of technology, I think that as an industry, we are going to define the how. We are going to be interacting with people on technologies to optimize the use of electricity, and as you know, all of these great manufacturers that are, you know, from Whirlpool to GE to others, LG, that are putting all of this intelligence into their devices, the efficiency equation is largely being solved through an opportunity of technology. However, I think what we should be challenging ourselves to is, you know, how much of this can be done without requiring the consumer to think about it? While it's great to engage the consumer and do all these different things, we're all human. How much time do each of us, even though we're absolutely ingrained in this industry, spend thinking about, you know, what our electric bill is versus the other expenses in our life? And I think over time, this is a challenge that, you know, a bunch of the venture capital community and people like that are saying, you know, we're not necessarily buying into the argument that dramatic amounts of education and everything needs to happen. We're buying into the thought process that we should figure it out for them so they don't have to think about it. And I think it's very, very interesting, just this whole discussion and where it will move forward.
So one of the ways of doing this, and Anish Chopra actually mentioned this at his talk at Connectivity Week 3 weeks ago, was to actually go through children. He is actually embarking on a program to communicate to 3rd to 8th graders to ask their parents to ask the utilities for electronically deliverable utility bill information. We don't know too much about the program right now, but it's just another way of thinking about this. Is not going directly to the bill payer, but going sort of around to that community.
Excuse me while I snicker at that.
Kids as influencers. That's
yeah,
interesting.
Well, my
so
kids nag me about a lot of the things, so I
and
mean, it's just one of them.
Parents tend to listen to kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. Very brief, 10-15 seconds comments. Chris Eisenberg.
Well, I just think that we're at a very interesting time period in the industry, and you know, the questions that I've teed up in this webinar, we certainly are going to have a great cast of speakers to get down to them, and really my whole objective in being involved in this is to learn how we can improve things going forward, and I try to get the statement in there, but
okay.
So anyway, that's how we view it.
Okay, briefly, Deanna.
Yeah, just briefly, you can see here that we have a partnership even in planning this day between NEMA, EEI, and the Galvin Initiative, and that's really a microcosm of the way Grid Week is organized overall. So, and the conference, I think, really benefits from it. So, I'm looking forward to seeing you all there.
Cool.
Yeah. Hey, if you're out there, if you go to the website, take a look at that agenda online. You can click through. You can see the sections that we have planned. There's room. There's opportunities out there. Provide your feedback. Let us know what we've missed, what we can do, what we should be including that we don't have on there, because we gladly take that kind of input.
Closing comments, Chris Hickman?
And just echoing Paul's, thank you all so much. Dramatic number of questions, great feedback, and please continue to provide it. Go do look at that agenda. the purpose of this is to provide the most relevant current content and create an opportunity for a collaborative dialogue so that we can get to a better answer and a better solution. And appreciate everybody's time to provide that kind of feedback today, and look forward for that to continue.
Nick, if you can put the next slide. We do plan to have 2 more of these webinars, one talking about strategic solutions, which is another focus area for Grid Week, and the third one, which will be on August 4th, will be on state of deployment, where we will dig into, with the help of EPRI and DOE, into development projects, state of projects that's going on. So just as a reminder, Grid Week is happening in September in Washington, D.C. So with that, from Washington, D.C., I thank you for your participation, your questions, and we'll see you around. Thank you. Goodbye.